Takuto was a terminally ill boy who reincarnated into the world of his favorite game after his death alongside his favorite game character. While the two of them decide to build an empire together just like they did in the game, they have no idea that Takuto has been reborn as the legendary king of ruin who will destroy the world so that it can be reborn. Takuto had been a terminally ill boy, spending most of his days immersed in a civilization-building strategy game called Eternal Nations. After clearing every possible challenge in the game, he decided to start over one final time. But as the game loaded, he quietly passed away. He felt his consciousness sink into darkness. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself seated on a stone throne in the middle of a forest. Confused by his surroundings, he tried to make sense of what had happened. Then, a familiar figure appeared before him. Takuto immediately recognized the woman. It was Atou, the sludge witch, his favorite character from Eternal Nations. He remembered how he had once played the game on the most difficult setting, choosing the kingdom of ruin and evil Mynoghra as his starting point. Though initially weak, Atou had a unique trait. She absorbed the powers of the enemies she defeated and became the strongest character by the end. Atou addressed him as her king, and Takuto wondered if this was an elaborate roleplay scenario. But Atou assured him there was no need for pretense. She already knew everything about him. She knew his name and even commented that he had never touched grass in his life. She recognized him as the top-tier player who had conquered nightmare difficulty using the most challenging civilization. Takuto was astonished that she understood not only her role as a game character, but also his identity as a player. Atou explained that she remembered every game session they had together. She recalled his strategies, the words he had spoken to her through the screen, and even the more embarrassing moments when he had shown affection toward her. Despite the awkwardness, Takuto was thrilled to finally speak with his favorite character face to face. Atou expressed an even greater joy at the reunion. When Takuto asked if this was heaven and whether she had summoned him, Atou clarified that she too had been summoned. As for the location, she felt it resembled the world of Eternal Nations. She then knelt before him, gently took his hand, and declared that being together was what truly mattered. She suggested that they team up once again to build a civilization of their own. Takuto was speechless as Atou pulled him from the throne. She reminded him that they had conquered the world many times before and urged him to treat this as a fresh beginning. He liked the sound of that. He formally asked her to serve him in establishing a glorious civilization, and she gladly accepted. With dramatic flair, she pretended to be a powerful witch as she pledged her loyalty. But both of them soon blushed, realizing how cringeworthy the dialogue had been. Takuto then reminded her of the first thing they always did in Mynoghra. She nodded, saying they would become shut-ins and hide from the world. Following their routine, Takuto activated his emergency skill to summon a giant scout bug. He and Atou agreed that secrecy was their top priority during the early stages. Stealth and information gathering were essential. Takuto commanded the insect to scout the surroundings. It flew off immediately. Atou was surprised by how smoothly everything was functioning in this new world. Takuto explained that, just like in the game, he could share the vision of the bug. He also mentioned that half of his mana had been used to create it, so now it was best to begin working on a starting settlement. He wished he had enough mana left to summon a fighter unit, but that wasn't an option right now. Atou looked discouraged, realizing that in her current state she was too weak to protect even herself, let alone Takuto. Meanwhile, Takuto observed the surrounding forest through the eyes of the bug. There was nothing but dense wilderness in every direction. Atou lamented her uselessness, but Takuto reassured her, saying that her mere presence was enough for him. She was overjoyed by his words. Just then, the bug spotted a group of tired, impoverished dark elves. Atou commented that this was good news. Dark elves were typically neutral, albeit leaning toward neutral evil, and their kingdom Loki shared the same alignment. But Takuto grew concerned. If this truly was the world of Eternal Nations and another civilization was already nearby, then his own fledgling kingdom was at serious risk. Atou responded that if danger came, they would simply escape together. Takuto agreed with her plan and decided to keep watching the elves while continuing the reconnaissance. As they unexpectedly came across Takuto and Atou, both parties were equally surprised to see one another. Sensing danger, Atou silently resolved to protect her king with her life. The leader of the Dark Elves, a man named Jia, had come in search of food for his starving people. His assistant had warned him not to enter the forest due to old legends about a sealed evil lurking within, but Jia had refused to back down. His people needed him. And then, he had come face to face with Takuto and Atou. He could barely see Takuto's features, only a shadowy figure shrouded in ominous energy. Fear gripped him. It seemed the legends were true. Believing that a single misstep could doom his clan, Jia dropped to his knees and introduced himself. His followers followed suit. He apologized for trespassing on Takuto's territory. Atou responded in a gangster-like tone, pleased that they knew their place. She demanded to know the reason for their presence. Jia attempted to explain through a sob story, but Atou, unimpressed, told him to get to the point. Terrified, Jia quickly revealed that their clan had been unjustly banished by the council and continued to suffer persecution. They had entered the cursed forest seeking safety but had since run out of food. His people were now starving. Takuto asked if they had truly endured such hardship. Jia froze in fear. But when Atou reminded him to answer the King Sep's question, he recounted their plight, how they had been forced into exile and had found no sustenance here. Jia wondered if Takuto would treat them cruelly as others had, but to his shock, Takuto tossed him some apples and said they were delicious. Jia had never seen apples before and hesitated, but his followers quickly devoured them, marveling at their sweetness. Takuto even summoned some pears, stunned. Jia was unsure of how to respond. Atou asked him why he wasn't eating the fruit his king had so graciously provided. Jia bowed deeply and explained that he wished to bring it to the rest of the tribe, especially the children, before eating himself. Takuto felt pity and began summoning a massive quantity of food. Atou was horrified by his generosity while Jia was overwhelmed. Dark elves had always been discriminated against for their perceived darkness. No one had ever shown them kindness until now. Jia asked who Takuto truly was, but Takuto simply told him to bring the food to his people. Jia and his followers hurried back to their camp, where the entire clan finally ate their fill. Jia chose not to tell the other elves where the food had come from. That night, as he sat alone by the campfire, the clan elder approached him. The elder remarked on the extraordinary flavor of the fruits, claiming he had never tasted anything like them in all his years. He asked where Jia had found them. Jia explained his encounter with the feared being in the forest. The elder was shaken. The figure described by Jia matched the King of Ruin, a figure spoken of in ancient books. According to prophecy, the King of Ruin would appear when the world grew too full, destroying it to allow for rebirth. Jia believed that Takuto fit the description, but in truth, he had not understood anything Takuto had said. He had relied entirely on Atou's behavior to guide his actions. The elder was uncertain, but asked if Jia had offered anything in return for the food. Jia replied that he had not. The elder doubted this. No evil being would grant such kindness without demanding payment, but Jia defended Takuto, insisting he had shown mercy. The elder grew frustrated, questioning how Jia could speak so respectfully of a supposed evil being. But after a heated exchange, he acknowledged that Jia had done what was necessary to help their people. He then declared that as the clan's senior-most elf, he would negotiate with the Dark King himself. Perhaps, at long last, they could earn the peaceful life they had always sought. The next day, Jia prepared to visit Takuto again. Elder Molter asked him whether he was ready to face the king, stating that since they had already accepted charity from the Dark King, they must also be ready to pay any price he demanded in return. Jia objected, saying that Takuto had never mentioned anything like that. However, Molter replied that it was simply in the nature of evil beings to demand compensation in exchange for their good deeds. Even so, Molter agreed that they had no other option but to rely on Takuto for survival, as no other place was safe for them. The two of them decided to go meet Takuto together, unaware that an insect scout had been observing them the entire time. Takuto immediately recalled the bug to receive its report. Upon learning that the elves were coming, he hoped they would simply take the food he had prepared for them and leave without any trouble. He began to feel anxious, admitting that he struggled to communicate properly under pressure, making negotiations with the dark elves particularly stressful. Atou offered to handle it on his behalf, reasoning that this would also demonstrate that her king did not even consider the dark elves worthy of his direct attention. Shortly after, Molter and Gia arrived. The elder greeted Takuto respectfully and thanked him for providing food to their people. He then asked for the name of the person who had helped them. After receiving Takuto's permission, Atou introduced him as the King of Ruin. Both dark elves were stunned, their worst fears confirmed. Atou then instructed them to take the food and leave quickly, warning that it wouldn't last long. Molter responded that he wished to repay Takuto for his kindness and asked what they could offer in return. Atou dismissed the idea, stating that they likely possessed nothing that could satisfy her king. She questioned whether they had anything they even considered valuable. Molter hesitated, unable to think of anything worthwhile. Upon noticing his hesitation, Atou glared at him suspiciously and accused him of plotting something. Molter began to panic, and Takuto quickly realized that the negotiation was heading in a bad direction. He called Atou over to discuss their strategy. She became irritated, accusing him of being too lenient. She criticized the two elves for not even knowing how to negotiate, warning that they would become obstacles if they continued this way. She suggested killing them and placing their heads on spikes around the base. Takuto firmly told her to stop behaving like a certain infamous Austrian painter. He reminded her that the elves simply wished to coexist peacefully and repay his generosity. He proposed that they ask for something the elves could provide in return, rather than offering food for free, as this would foster a healthier relationship between them. Unable to counter his logic, Atou agreed. She turned back to the elves and announced that her king had decided to accept their offerings. Upon seeing the relief on Molter's face, both Takuto and Atou realized that he had assumed Takuto was a typical evil being. Atou scolded him for that assumption, but then found herself uncertain about what they should request in exchange. Takuto suddenly had an idea and instructed Ask the elves about the outside world. Molter expressed great enthusiasm at the request and vowed to share everything he had seen and heard beyond the forest. Atou then declared that once he had shared this information, he and his tribe would have to leave the forest immediately. Both Molter and Gia were shocked by the order. They pleaded to remain in the forest under Takuto's protection, but Atou warned them not to be greedy if they wished to stay alive. Gia tried to argue, but Molter silenced him, saying they had to obey the king's command. As they began to leave, Takuto suddenly felt guilty for casting them out. He quickly had another idea and told Molter and Gia that they could become his citizens. The two elves were stunned by the offer, as was Atou, who asked Takuto what he was thinking. He reminded her about the game's refugee system, which allowed different species to become citizens. He explained that dark elves, being a neutral species, could easily adapt to the evil alignment of their kingdom and coexist with the other races residing there. Atou remained doubtful, noting that species aligned with evil often clashed, but Takuto pointed out that their main species, the homunculi, looked like disassembled humans put back together poorly, making them difficult to spend time with. As soon as that image came to mind, Atou agreed without hesitation. She turned to the elves and announced that Takuto planned to build a kingdom and was willing to accept them as citizens if they pledged loyalty to him. Molter asked what becoming his citizens would entail, and Atou clarified that they would become evil beings, but assured them it was more enjoyable than they might expect. Soon after, Takuto and Atou visited the dark elf settlement, where everyone had gathered to welcome them. Terrified at the sight of Takuto, some of the weaker elves fainted. Takuto seated himself on his throne, with Atou at his side, who declared that the dark elves were now citizens of their kingdom, Mynoghra. She asked Takuto one final time if he was sure, and when he confirmed it, the elves were formally accepted into the kingdom. Atou congratulated them, telling them that their survival and safety were now guaranteed by their new king. Gia wondered aloud if that was truly all, as he didn't feel any different after supposedly becoming an evil being. Almost immediately, he regretted speaking, as a surge of intense hatred erupted within him and the others. They began to dwell on the people who had persecuted their kind and were consumed by a desire for revenge. Two of the more normal elves present were deeply concerned by this change. Seeing their distress, Takuto asked if they were all right. Gia was moved to tears, realizing that someone genuinely cared about him and his people. The dark elves began to cheer for Takuto, tears streaming down their faces, and he felt overwhelmed by the display. A few days later, Molter brought Takuto a map of the continent. Takuto collapsed as soon as he saw it. When Atou asked what was wrong, he told her to take a look herself. Their starting position on the map was abysmal. They were located on a continent dominated by two massive and powerful civilizations. One of them was the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, a nation of humans who worshipped the god Arlos and followed a rigid good alignment. The other was El-Nay, the alliance of elementals, where elves who revered nature resided, also aligned with the good side. Atou panicked, realizing that if either of these factions discovered their kingdom, they would be annihilated. She passed out beside Takuto, but he soon calmed her down, pointing out that as long as they remained hidden, they could continue growing stronger. He explained that, in the game, their main species, the homunculi, were too unintelligent to conduct meaningful research. However, now that they had the Dark Elves, they could expect better results in magical development. Not long after, the Dark Elves visited again. This time Ga brought his assistant Emily, a knowledgeable scholar with expertise in other kingdoms, promising that she could be of more help than they could. Atou praised their dedication and announced that they would be entrusted with important roles as per Takuto's wishes. First, she appointed Molter as the head of internal affairs, expressing high expectations after learning that he could use magic. Then she made Jay the head warrior of Mynoghra and tasked him with building a strong army to defend the kingdom. She gave him full authority to recruit soldiers. Gia, enthusiastic about his new position, declared that he would slay their enemies and mount their heads as trophies. Takuto, already disturbed, expressed his disapproval of war as barbaric. Atou explained to the confused Gia that their king preferred peace, a notion that baffled him. Why would the king of ruin love peace? Molter couldn't help but mock Gia, then confidently stood up and proclaimed that unlike Gia, who had only muscles and no brains, he would be far more helpful. Gia took the remark as a challenge and told Takuto that he was young and strong and could work tirelessly. Atou, unaware they were competing for their king's attention, misunderstood their rivalry as workaholism. She asked Takuto whether they should assign the two a mission to gather resources. Takuto suggested they focus on beautifying the terrain and constructing homes. Atou relayed the command to Molter, instructing him to collect timber while preserving the forest as much as possible. Molter accepted the task enthusiastically, mentioning that the Dark Elves were originally forest dwellers. Takuto also told them to reforest any areas they cut down. The elves were puzzled by the unfamiliar term. Realizing that their civilization might not be advanced enough to understand reforesting, Takuto asked if they knew about military magic or the 6 major elements. Molter responded that he only knew of 4 major elements, and Emily added that she had never heard of any country using military magic. Takuto and Atou realized that this world was more primitive than expected, but that was actually a good thing. With advanced magical technology, they could surpass the other nations quickly. Atou then explained that reforesting involved using magic to grow new trees where old ones had been cut. The Dark Elves said they did something similar but couldn't speed up the process with magic. Atou elaborated that reforesting utilized the 6 major elements to grow trees faster, and then she falsely credited Takuto for the discovery. She continued to shower him with praise, claiming he had created the unique fruits they had eaten earlier, and mentioned grapes as her favorite. Emily agreed, saying she had planted grape seeds and that some had already sprouted. This surprised Takuto, who hadn't expected anything to grow in this world. He quickly realized that if he could create Earth's fruits with magic, he might also be able to reproduce other items. He tested his theory by creating a coin and confirmed that he could also create gunpowder and other scientific materials. With that, he understood he could rapidly advance his civilization beyond the others. Meanwhile, in the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, new events began to unfold. Saint Selena led a group of knights to the snow-covered foothills to eliminate a monster threat endangering nearby villages. The moment goblins charged toward her, she raised her staff and unleashed her holy flame, incinerating them instantly. The divine fire faded into the clouds, and where scorched ground remained, sunlight broke through, prompting flowers to bloom. A knight captain explained to his men that Selena's power not only purified evil monsters but also turned the battlefields into blooming meadows. He added that her divine nature was the reason the elves maintained a friendly alliance with them. Shortly after, Selena advised the cardinal to dispatch paladins to the south, warning him about a dark omen she had seen concerning the cursed forest. The cardinal refused, explaining that the cursed forest lay at the farthest edge of the continent and that he required permission from his superiors to send troops there. Selena threatened to venture out alone if the church would not act. Pressured, the cardinal eventually relented and promised to mobilize what soldiers he could. At the same time, in Mynoghra, Takuto and Atou focused on developing their territory, starting by constructing homes for the Dark Elves. A temporary throne room had already been built around Takuto's seat, and he looked forward to hosting meetings and gatherings with key members of his kingdom. Molter, Gia, and Emily soon arrived, and Atou immediately proposed beginning their first council meeting. Before they could start, Emily presented a gift to Takuto, an outfit that made him look like a femboy. He gratefully accepted it, relieved to have fresh clothes. Although the elves didn't notice much change in his appearance, they trusted Atou's judgment when she praised how great he looked. With the gift presented, Atou commenced the meeting. Takuto, however, remained too distracted by his own appearance. Seeing this, Atou decided to proceed with the council without his input, promising to consult him if necessary. Takuto agreed without protest. As the meeting progressed, Molter inquired about the types of buildings they should prioritize. Atou suggested they begin with food production facilities and unveiled a strange, unsettling plant that would serve as their main food source for the time being. The elves were visibly repulsed by the sight and asked for an explanation. Atou informed them that it was a flesh plant, a unique species cultivated by their civilization. It produced meat that tasted like human flesh and was highly nutritious. Startled, the elves insisted that they did not consume humans. Atou reassured them that the flesh plant was merely a temporary measure and other food options would become available soon. She added that they would also need to build storage facilities and management sheds alongside the farms, a task that Emily volunteered to take on. Moving to the next topic, Atou emphasized the importance of research, especially in small nations like theirs where advancing technology could turn the tide of power. Molter asked what kind of technology they should pursue, and Atou told him to focus on magic technology. Excited, Takuto encouraged the idea, and Molter, a mage himself, promised to give his best. When Molter asked for more specifics, Atou directed him toward military magic, explaining that while standard attack spells targeted only a few enemies, military-grade magic had the power to devastate entire cities and reshape the land. She instructed him to gather the most talented magical elves and begin researching immediately. Molter was thrilled by the challenge of creating new spells that had never existed in this world. Next, the discussion shifted to military strategy. Gia lit up at the chance to contribute, but Takuto immediately clarified that they wouldn't be investing heavily in an army at this stage. Atou added that armies were costly to maintain and offered no tangible return during peaceful times. Gia countered that they lacked the strength to properly protect their king, making military focus essential. Molter added that both he and Gia had bounties on their heads as Dark Elf leaders, making them likely targets for attack. Takuto acknowledged their concerns and proposed a different solution, creating a hero. Atou supported the idea, noting that although hero creation was expensive, heroes required no upkeep, making them ideal for their situation. The elves were unfamiliar with the concept, prompting Atou to explain that heroes were immensely powerful beings who served directly under the king. There were specific requirements for summoning each type of hero, but Atou was confident they could summon one soon. Takuto was visibly excited by the idea. He reflected on the role of mana in this world, knowing that a kingdom could only harvest mana from its people. The happier the citizens, the more mana they generated. Motivated, he vowed to make his kingdom the happiest place in the world. Meanwhile, back in Qualia, a junior paladin named Lonius had been selected to join the investigation team, heading toward the Cursed Forest. Accompanying him was a senior paladin named Vertil, who took great pleasure in annoying Lonius for being overly serious and formal. Vertil grumbled about the team's small size, just 2 paladins and a few mercenaries, and criticized the church for not taking Selena's warning more seriously. Lonius agreed but understood they had no insight into the thoughts of the higher-ups. He knew that success would bring them rewards, but failure would most likely place all the blame on him. Back in Mynoghra, Takuto inspected the progress of his growing civilization. The sight made him nostalgic. He had seen this development phase countless times on a screen, but now he was experiencing it in person. Emily gave him a tour, explaining that dark elves traditionally built tree houses. However, construction was progressing slowly since most of their focus was on cultivating flesh trees. The flesh trees were growing well, and storage and management buildings were already in place. Emily also mentioned that they had discovered a freshwater spring and were testing whether water could be drawn from it. Regarding magic research, Molter and the other mages were working diligently in the newly established research center. Takuto was pleased by all the updates and even more delighted to learn that the elves were taking initiatives such as locating water sources on their own. Seeing that the elves who once appeared weary now looked cheerful made him especially happy. When he expressed this to Emily, she began crying tears of joy. Takuto panicked at her sudden breakdown, but Emily quickly composed herself and resumed the tour. She took them to the flesh tree farm, stating that thanks to the tools Takuto had created, the first harvest would arrive soon. Next, she led them to the water source the elves had discovered. However, the atmosphere around it had changed. It now felt ominous, and the water had turned dark. Emily was disappointed, believing it was no longer usable. Before Atou could respond, Molter and Gia arrived to inspect the site. They too believed the water was no longer safe. To their surprise, Atou took a sip and confidently declared it safe for consumption. She explained that the area now appeared eerie because it had become part of Mynoghra through a game mechanic known as the Cursed Terrain. Takuto urged the elves to take a deep breath, and they suddenly felt invigorated, their minds clearing and bodies brimming with energy. Atou elaborated that cursed terrain enhanced creatures with evil alignment while weakening neutral or good-aligned beings. Since the Dark Elves were now officially part of Mynoghra, they too were considered evil beings and could safely benefit from the cursed terrain. Gia confirmed this by drinking the water himself. Atou concluded that soon, the entire forest would be under the cursed terrain's influence. Takuto admitted that this could pose a problem, as the darkened land might attract unwanted attention. Molter agreed, noting that once the entire forest became visibly cursed, enemies would easily spot them. Gia again proposed forming an army, but both Atou and Takuto reminded him that they were preparing to summon a hero. Molter still seemed unclear about what exactly a hero was, so Atou decided to demonstrate. She summoned dark tentacles from her back and effortlessly sliced through nearby trees, then revealed that she was a hero herself. Even at just 1% of her true power, she claimed she could defeat entire armies. The elves were astonished, and Takuto proudly declared that heroes were incredible beings who grew stronger over time, even without doing anything. Changing the subject, Takuto scolded Atou for destroying the trees unnecessarily and told her to clean up the mess later. The elves, still in awe, praised Takuto for having such powerful subordinates. They insisted on constructing a grand palace worthy of their king. Takuto initially declined, saying he didn't need one yet, but the elves refused to let him live in houses similar to theirs. Atou agreed with them, explaining that building a palace would boost public happiness. Takuto eventually gave his consent, stating that while he hoped for a flying fortress in the future, a regular palace would suffice for now. At the same time, an investigation group led by Lonius and Vertil began their journey to the cursed forests in the south. Vertil remained dissatisfied with the size of their group. Lonius explained that this was the best they could manage, as most of their forces were tied up dealing with disturbances in the north. Evil aligned species had suddenly emerged there, attacking and looting cities, and much of the Empire's firepower had been redirected to respond. Among the mercenaries, a few remarked that the northern team was in for a rough time. They considered themselves fortunate not to have received that assignment. Despite the high pay, the job involved a witch, and none of them wanted anything to do with that. That night, Lonius, curious about the witch, asked a mercenary named Bargo for more details. Bargo explained that rumors claimed the chaos in the north stemmed from a witch. Lonius dismissed the idea, stating that a single individual couldn't be responsible for such a large number of monsters. Bargo agreed and suggested it was likely the work of a cult. Before the conversation continued, Vertil told him to keep quiet before he jinxed them all. Lonius became irritated with Vertil upon realizing he was drunk. He lectured him, reminding him that as paladins they were forbidden from drinking since they served the god. Vertil appeared ready to challenge him with references from religious texts, but quickly lost interest and began flirting with a waitress who brought more alcohol. Bargo then questioned why 2 paladins had been sent so far south. He feared it might involve another witch. If that were true, he wanted to take his men and leave before things turned dangerous. Lonius admitted he did not know. Vertil, however, revealed he had gathered some information from the waitress. A group of dark elves had recently taken refuge in the cursed forests, and the higher-ups likely just wanted to address that. Bargo seemed relieved and agreed that dealing with the dark elves quickly was wise, as they were notoriously skilled in assassinations and curses. Lonius also believed that ignoring the dark elves could lead to them becoming a threat. Vertil, however, urged him to relax. He reminded Lonius that their mission was only reconnaissance, and if violence broke out, they should retreat rather than engage. Still, Lonius was fixated on the idea of eradicating evil wherever it appeared. He insisted that, as paladins, they could not abandon their duty. Vertil urged him to stop chasing glory and to fight only when necessary. He reminded him that they all had families and should be more cautious with their decisions. Meanwhile, in Mynoghra, the first harvest from the flesh trees was ready and placed in the center of a massive altar. Takuto stood before the harvested fruits, surrounded by dark elves watching with anticipation. As he poured his mana into the pile, it transformed into a giant bug. The elves were stunned, amazed that he had created life from mere fruit. Atou began praising him, claiming this display wasn't even 1% of his full potential. She told the others that with their devotion, Takuto would grow even more powerful and perform even greater miracles. The elves cheered him on. Later, Takuto returned to his throne, relieved that he had succeeded in creating a bug monster in exchange for food. It was a feature from the game, but he still didn't fully understand how it functioned in this world. Atou advised him not to overthink it, as they had now established a method to create more creatures for the kingdom. She then told Takuto it was time to proceed to the next step. He agreed and said he would summon a hero once they had gathered enough mana. Excited, Atou asked which hero he planned to summon. Takuto answered that he intended to summon Isla, the queen of insects. Atou approved of the choice. Takuto explained that Isla could strengthen all insect-type monsters and enable them to fight on the front lines. She could also produce larvae to handle menial labor, providing support on both military and domestic fronts. Atou was pleased to hear that he had thought it through. Takuto added that Isla was the only viable option since the other heroes were too unstable. Atou agreed, noting that the others still needed years of therapy. Takuto said he hoped to summon them eventually, but not just yet. Elsewhere, Lonius and his group had arrived at the Dark Continent. Their first opponent appeared in the form of a hill giant. As Lonius began issuing commands to the mercenaries, Vertil said there was no need. He declared that he would handle the monster alone. Believing time was short, he preferred to act quickly without interference. He approached the hill giant confidently, raising his swords while the others watched. Vertil enchanted his blade with holy power. The hill giant waited for the spell to finish before attacking. Vertil blocked its heavy club with ease and then shattered it using his holy sword. He leapt toward the monster and struck it multiple times, felling it before it could retaliate. After returning to the group, Lonius praised him, saying the mission would be easy thanks to his strength. But Vertil did not share his optimism. That doubt began to worry Lonius. Back in Mynoghra, Takuto was enjoying a burger when Atou suggested he eat something healthier. He replied that he had eaten nothing but bland hospital food, and now he wanted to try new things. He expressed concern over her diet too, noting she had only been eating salad. Atou replied that such food suited her better. They discussed how construction was progressing well. Takuto then told Atou to summon Molter and the others after they finished eating. He explained that their newly created scout bugs had mapped the nearby area and he intended to take action regarding the human settlement nearby. He first asked Atou to confirm whether the nearby town belonged to the Holy Kingdom of Qualia. Atou assured him it was an independent neutral territory. Takuto was glad, as it meant they could negotiate. He hoped nothing would go wrong during their interaction and believed things would be fine. Atou joked that he might jinx them, and Takuto laughed, insisting that wouldn't happen. Just then, he received a message from a bug informing him that an armed group was approaching the forest. Takuto told Atou they should try to turn them away peacefully. But if that failed, they had to prepare for battle. The armed group was indeed Lonius and Vertil's party. As they advanced into the forest, Vertil told everyone to halt. He sensed someone approaching. Atou emerged from the shadows, clad in black clothing that concealed her face and features. Vertil asked her to identify herself. She claimed to be a dark elf who had taken refuge in the forest with her clan, saying nowhere else was safe. Vertil acknowledged her situation and told her to step aside as they needed to investigate the forest. She warned them not to enter. Sensing something was off, Vertil hesitated, but Lonius began shouting at Atou, demanding how she dared to defy the orders of a servant of God. Vertil snapped at him, telling him not to interfere. Lonius was furious at being scolded over what he considered a minor issue. Vertil returned to the discussion with Atou, saying they could not back down just because she objected. He asked if something was hidden within. Atou replied that it was only a group of elves wanting to live peacefully. She questioned why he was so determined to enter a place forsaken by God. After a moment of silence, Vertil revealed that the Saintess had received a vision of a great evil concealed in the forest. He couldn't leave without confirming it with his own eyes. The mercenaries were stunned, unaware of this information. Lonius chastised Vertil for revealing national secrets so openly. Vertil shouted that there were moments when such secrets had to be shared. Lonius became even angrier, noting that even high paladins weren't authorized to disclose divine prophecies without approval from higher authorities. Still, Vertil once more asked Atou to let them inspect the forest, but her demeanor changed. She told them they would find nothing of interest and ordered them to leave immediately. Lonius grew enraged that a dark elf would dare to defy a divine prophecy. He sensed the air around Atou changing and concluded that something truly evil must lie within the forest. Vertil, however, remained open to negotiation. He asked Atou to swear on her god that there was no threat to Qualia within the forest. Atou swore that they feared Qualia more than Qualia feared them. Satisfied, Vertil declared their withdrawal. Lonius was stunned, convinced that Atou was clearly hiding something. Vertil called him a coward who lacked faith and accused him of projecting his fear. He stated that their investigation had found nothing and began walking away. But Lonius refused to let him make that decision. He declared that he was revoking Vertil's authority as High Paladin for revealing a prophecy to the enemy and for abandoning his sacred duty. He ordered the mercenaries to enter the forest and discover the evil within. Bargo agreed, stating that Lonius was the one funding their mission. Atou begged them not to go further, but Lonius ordered her capture despite Vertil's objections. Atou sighed, noting that the negotiations had failed. Moments later, the mercenaries were impaled on her spikes like kebabs. Lonius was the first to be knocked out so quickly that he didn't even register what had happened. Vertil, the only survivor who had witnessed everything, panicked and confirmed that they were dealing with a witch. Atou dropped her disguise and lamented that the conversation had been going so smoothly. It was a shame that things had turned out this way. But that's where the video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.